How instant coffee is made in factory. Instant coffee feels like a tiny kitchen trick that should not work. A spoonful of dry brown crystals falls into hot water, swirls for a moment, disappears, and somehow becomes coffee again. No grinder humming on the counter, no paper filter, no slow drip filling the room with steam. Just powder coming back to life as a drink that once began inside roasted beans. But in a factory, instant coffee is not fake coffee. It is real brewed coffee, carefully taken apart, dried with remarkable precision, and rebuilt into a form that can sit quietly on a shelf for months, waiting for water to wake it up again. The story of instant coffee begins with a simple problem, but a stubborn one. How do you keep coffee ready without brewing it fresh every single time? For centuries, coffee was never instant. It was a ritual. Beans had to be roasted, crushed, boiled, filtered, poured through cloth, or watched carefully over heat. In homes, cafes, ships, military camps, and faraway trading posts, a cup of coffee demanded more than desire. It needed fire. It needed water. It needed time. It needed equipment. In a warm kitchen or a busy cafe, that process could feel comforting. But on a battlefield, on a long ocean voyage, deep in a work camp, or in a place where fresh beans spoiled before anyone could use them, that same ritual became a problem. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, inventors began chasing an idea that sounded almost unnatural at the time: coffee that could dissolve. One important breakthrough came from Satoru Kato, a Japanese-American chemist working in Chicago. Kato had already experimented with soluble tea, and around the beginning of the 20th century, he helped create one of the first stable instant coffee powders. Not long after that, George Constant Lewis Washington developed his own commercial version and helped push instant coffee into a much wider market. Those early instant coffees were not elegant. Nobody would have mistaken them for a fresh cup poured in a cafe. They were dark, bitter, lightweight, and built for usefulness. But that was exactly the point. Instant coffee solved a real problem. For the first time, coffee could travel almost anywhere without needing a grinder, a pot, or a proper kitchen. The first versions of instant coffee were rough, especially compared with what people drink today. Some tasted sharp, some tasted flat. Others had a burned edge that lingered too long. Certain powders clumped together before they ever reached the cup. Others lost their smell so quickly that opening the container felt disappointing. But the basic idea was too useful to disappear. Even with its flaws, instant coffee had found a reason to exist. Its first major surge came during war. Soldiers needed caffeine, warmth, and a small taste of normal life in places where normal life had almost vanished. During World War I, instant coffee became part of military routine. It was packed into rations, carried into trenches, stirred into tin mugs, and swallowed on cold mornings far from home. It was not about comfort in the fancy sense. It was not about flavor notes or perfect brewing. It was about speed, energy, and familiarity. Hot water and a small portion of powder could create a cup in minutes. After the war, instant coffee followed soldiers back into civilian life. It entered kitchens at a time when the modern home was changing fast. Packaged food was becoming more common. Factories were learning how to make products on enormous scales. Advertising promised that life could be easier, cleaner, and quicker. Electric appliances were appearing in more homes. The old routine of grinding beans, boiling water, and waiting for coffee to brew began to compete with a newer promise: convenience without effort. But early instant coffee still carried one serious weakness. It was made by removing water from brewed coffee, and heat was not gentle. Coffee aroma is fragile. The smells people love most come from tiny volatile compounds released during roasting and brewing. When factories forced too much heat into the process, many of those delicate aromas disappeared. What remained was still coffee, but something was missing. It had the bitterness, the color, and the caffeine, yet not enough of the warmth and depth people expected from a freshly brewed cup. So the next challenge became much harder than simply drying coffee. The real challenge was drying coffee without destroying the very things that made it feel like coffee in the first place. Inside a modern instant coffee factory, the process begins in a place that smells nothing like powder. It begins with real coffee beans, the same basic ingredient behind every cup served in a cafe, poured at a diner, or made at home before sunrise. Green coffee beans arrive at the factory in massive sacks or bulk containers. They are cleaned, sorted, and inspected before moving toward the roasting drums. This is where the first dramatic change happens. Pale green beans begin to darken. Moisture escapes. Sugars and amino acids react under heat. Oils move toward the surface. The hard raw beans become fragrant, brown, and brittle. The air fills with a deep smell of roasted coffee, warm, smoky, slightly sweet, and familiar enough to make the entire factory feel awake. After roasting, the beans are ground, but not always as finely as coffee made for a home machine. Industrial extraction needs control. The ground coffee is loaded into large extraction columns, tall steel vessels that behave like giant brewing systems. Hot water moves through the coffee under carefully managed pressure and temperature. The purpose is to pull out the soluble parts of the bean: flavor compounds, caffeine, acids, sugars, and aroma molecules. What flows out is not instant coffee, yet. It is a strong, liquid coffee extract, darker and more concentrated than the drink poured into an ordinary mug. At this stage, it is coffee in a powerful form, but it still contains far too much water. To become instant coffee, most of that water has to disappear, and it has to disappear without ruining the taste. The liquid extract is concentrated, often through evaporation. But because aroma is the fragile treasure of the whole process, some of it may be captured separately before the harshest steps begin. Those aromatic compounds can later be returned to the coffee, helping the finished product smell more like fresh brew when someone twists open a jar or tears open a sachet. Then comes the major transformation, the moment when coffee stops being liquid. The brewed extract has to become dry. There are two main ways a factory turns brewed coffee into instant coffee: spray drying and freeze drying. Both begin with liquid coffee extract. Both end with something dry enough to survive in a jar, but they take very different paths to get there. Spray drying is fast, efficient, and almost theatrical. The concentrated coffee extract is pumped to the top of a tall drying tower. There, nozzles or spinning discs break the liquid into a fine mist of tiny droplets. Hot air rushes through the tower. Each droplet falls through that moving heat, and in just seconds, the water evaporates from it. By the time the particles reach the bottom, they are no longer liquid at all. They have become dry coffee powder. This method is widely used because it can produce huge quantities quickly. It is practical, economical, and well suited for mass production. But it comes with a trade-off. Heat can change flavor. Fine powder may dissolve easily and pack efficiently, but some of coffee's more delicate aroma can be lost during the journey from mist to dry particles. Freeze drying is slower, more expensive, and much gentler. The coffee extract is first frozen into sheets, slabs, or granules at extremely low temperatures. Imagine brewed coffee turned into a dark frozen landscape, solid and silent. That frozen coffee is then broken into smaller pieces and placed inside a vacuum chamber. Under vacuum, the ice inside the coffee does something unusual. Instead of melting into liquid water, it sublimates, changing directly from ice into vapor. What remains is dry coffee crystals with much of their inner structure still intact. Because freeze drying uses low temperatures, more of the delicate flavor can survive. That is why freeze-dried instant coffee often appears as larger, uneven granules instead of fine powder. It is also why it is often sold as a higher quality product with a cleaner aroma and a taste closer to brewed coffee. After drying, the instant coffee is not simply poured into jars and sent away. It may go through agglomeration, a process where tiny particles are gently joined together into larger granules. This helps the coffee dissolve more smoothly, flow better from the spoon, and look more appealing. Aroma compounds may be added back. The coffee is tested for moisture, color, density, flavor, and solubility. Even the packaging becomes part of the engineering. Oxygen and humidity are enemies. A jar, pouch, or sachet must protect the coffee from moisture in the air, because instant coffee is always ready to absorb water, even before it reaches the cup. That is why modern instant coffee looks the way it does. Powder is efficient. Granules dissolve cleanly. Sealed packaging keeps everything dry and stable. Every detail is built around one central trick, making brewed coffee disappear into a shelf-stable form, then letting it return the moment hot water touches it. One of the strangest secrets of instant coffee is that factories often have to save the smell before they finish making the product. The aroma people expect when they open a jar is too delicate to survive every drying step on its own. So during production, part of that aroma may be captured from roasting or extraction, protected, and later added back. Another twist is even stranger. Instant coffee has already been brewed once before it ever reaches the consumer. The cup made at home is really coffee's second life. Instant coffee is not created from shortcuts alone. It comes from roasting drums, extraction columns, drying towers, vacuum chambers, and more than a century of attempts to make coffee portable without erasing its identity. A bean becomes a brew. The brew becomes an extract. The extract becomes powder or crystals. Then, in a kitchen, an office, a hotel room, a dorm, or a campsite, hot water reverses the factory's work in seconds. That tiny spoonful is not just convenience, it is an entire industrial journey waiting quietly to dissolve.